So it's really important for you to be on top of all the numerous reports that CHSP providers have to submit. CHSP providers have to submit an annual financial report by 31st of August each year. The report has to effectively declare that all the funding that the CHSP provider received was used for the purposes specified in the grant agreement, and whether there's any uncommitted or surplus funds in the current or previous financial year. It also has to have a statement of compliance that declares that the funding was only used for individuals who had an assessment approval. CHSP providers also need to submit a monthly compliance report within 14 days after the end of each month. So this report includes client-level data and service delivery information for the activities, the output measure that's required for the service type, the My Aged Care ID for each individual that receives services, and any individual contributions that your clients have paid to you during that period. Another regular report CHSP providers have to submit is the annual wellness and reablement report. So this is a report about things like what proportion of services you provide are short-term, episodic, or which reduce over time, and whether any of your clients have developed new skills, capabilities, and social connections, or learn to adapt to a functional disability as a result of the services that you're providing. This report is used by the government to analyse data and trends in providers' application of wellness and reablement approaches within the CHSP sector. A new requirement for CHSP providers is to submit an annual child safety compliance statement. This needs to be submitted by the 31st of March each year. Now, a lot of people have asked me about this because it seems quite strange that you're talking about child safety, given that you're primarily looking after older persons. But the reason you are asked about this is because the department itself needs to comply with the Commonwealth Child Safety Framework, which is a relatively new framework. And as part of that, they need to make sure that any organisations that they're dealing with are also complying. So, the annual Child Safety Compliance Statement requires CHSP providers to declare that they're complying with state, territory, and Commonwealth laws relating to child safety. So what this means is that you need to be aware of the laws that apply in your state, such as working with children checks. Now, in most states, you won't need to get these checks for CHSP, provided that your workforce don't have more than incidental contact with children. So, for example, if you're delivering services into older people's home and there happen to be grandchildren visiting from time to time, that's not going to require a working with children's check in, say, Victoria. However, if you were running a program whereby older people were spending time at, say, a childcare facility, and therefore your staff were in the childcare facility, that would require a working with children check. So it will depend mostly on the services that you're providing, but in most cases, it wouldn't be required. You really do need to make sure that you check the laws in your particular state and familiarise yourself with them so that you can confidently declare whether or not you've been compliant with those laws. Another report that CHSP providers in categories 4 and above need to submit is an annual complaints and feedback report. So this has to include information about the nature of the complaints and feedback you've received, how many you've received, which is why it's so important that you record these complaints. You need to also put in information about the action you've taken to resolve these complaints or feedback, including any subsequent improvements that you've made in relation to the complaints. You also need to put in information about how you've evaluated the effectiveness of the actions you've taken and whether these have been effective in terms of resolving each complaint and feedback. You also need to put in information about the number of days it's taken for you to resolve each complaint and feedback. Again, so important to capture that information in your system. You also need to include information about the education and training that's been delivered to the staff and on your workforce, and again, including contracted workforce in relation to each complaint and feedback. And finally, you need to include an analysis of the patterns of and any underlying reasons for complaints. Another report that CHSP providers in categories 5 and 6 need to submit is what we used to call the annual provider operations report. It doesn't really have a name now. One word might be a governing body report, but it effectively requires the CHSP provider to declare that it has complied with its obligations under the Aged Care Act. But that only applies if you're in categories 5 and 6. There are also ad hoc reports that CHSP providers can be asked for by the department at any time. So the first of these might be a compliance report. This is a report about any matters related to the CHSP's providers' management of the grant agreement, and you have to submit these within 14 days of a request. Another type of report you might be asked to provide is a service delivery report. So this is just a report about service delivery, and again, it has to be provided within 21 days of a request.